Welcome back, everyone, to another Downward Day. And today I'm dressed in all black because we have come here today in memoriam for a little TV show that was once near and dear to my heart. Of course, I'm talking about what was once everyone's favorite show, Rick and Morty. And boy, just when it seemed like the show was starting to get back on its feet and hit its stride, it's over. Okay? I'm calling it. It's over. It's the end. I, of course, am recording this the day after Justin Roiland got arrested and charged for domestic battery. Justin Roiland, of course, not just the co-creator of the show, but the voice of Rick and Morty. Tough to imagine that Rick and Morty can continue without the voice of Rick and Morty. And as for the legal case against him, I won't comment on that any further. He's either innocent or he's guilty. But either way, the show is toast. Okay? It's over. If you were having any hope of Rick and Morty making a glorious comeback, it's over. It's done. They might not cancel it outright, but it's never going to be what it once was. I think a lot of fans of the show, like myself, were kind of holding out hope that would happen, but no, that ship has sailed. It's over. Any chance of the show returning to what it once was is the nail in the coffin yesterday. The co-creator and voice of the titular characters getting arrested and charged with a very serious felony crime. It's over. And what can I say, man? What can I say? It was a show with all the potential in the world. All the potential. It's 2023 now, and funnily enough, that actually marks year 10. Year 10 of Rick and Morty. It started at the end of 2013. It's 2023 now. And in total, it ended up equating to about 2 years of pretty excellent television and 8 years of wasted potential and frustration. I don't really know how else to put it. 2 years of great TV, 8 years of frustration. And man, something about it is just hard to comprehend. How Rick and Morty's been around for 10 years and it's only on season 6. It feels like there was so much more it could have done. And again, it was a show that had everything going for it. The hype, the popularity, great writing, compelling characters, creative, imaginative. Boy, after that second season ended, it had all the momentum in the world. And God, man, it has to be the biggest missed opportunity. Other than maybe like Star Wars, it has to be the biggest missed opportunity, or more so, untapped potential out of any entertainment property in the past 10 years. And I really mean that. Now, of course, after season 4 ended, I made a video on my main channel talking about sort of the rise and fall of the show, and how I was still somewhat excited as a fan to see how they could turn it around, how they could pull it up out of the slump that they were apparently in. And I've had lots of questions since then, now that season 5 and 6 have come out, over what I think about the show now, over whether I think it continued to slump into mediocrity, or if it was starting to show signs of promise. And I was honestly leaning towards the latter. The common opinion online, at least on Twitter at this point, is that, yeah, the show kept going downhill. But the way people were justifying it was that they were looking at 2 really bad episodes, the dragon episode and the incest episode, and using that to pretty much write off the entire rest of the body of work that the show produced during those 2 seasons. And to tell you the truth, looking at it as someone who's been a fan since day 1, I really don't think most of the episodes in season 5 and 6 were that bad. And I didn't really think it was fair for so many people to completely disregard all the good episodes just because the show produced a few stinkers. I mean, if you look at any show out there with more than 20 episodes to offer, there's gonna be a few duds. It's just inevitable. Not every episode can be held to this unassailable standard of impeccable quality. You know, when looking at most shows out there, I think it's fair to throw them a few mulligans, you know. It just so happened that the first 2 seasons of Rick and Morty were so good that people developed this sort of standard for the show, this expectation that every single episode is gonna be a home run And I just don't consider that a reasonable standard to expect from any group of writers, no matter how talented they are. Eventually you're gonna run into some bad episodes, and I think that's what happened with Rick and Morty. But in season 4, 5, 6, there were also a lot of really good episodes. I think if you just take a look at the last few seasons in a vacuum and forget about the super high highs that season 1 and 2 achieved, you'd still be hard-pressed to call it a bad show, and I still think the overall average quality of the show was good. If you turn on an average episode from season 4, 5, and 6, it's going to be good. It's going to be entertaining. It's going to be something that doesn't feel like a giant waste of time. Are there stinkers and duds thrown in there? Yes, absolutely. But I think it's reasonable to assume that once a show gets into its 50th episode, a few of them aren't going to be that good. But just based on what the show has produced as of late, I think it's fair to say that it at least plateaued in quality, or leveled off. It didn't keep going downhill. Around season 3 or 4, there was a clear step down in quality, but since then, it's been pretty consistent. You know, at the very least, it hasn't continued going down the toilet. They've managed to put forward a fairly consistently good and entertaining product. And in my opinion, for every bad episode, there was at least several other episodes that were exceptional and worthy of praise. Was the show ever able to recapture the magic of season 1 and 2? I don't think so, but at the very least, it was showing signs of promise. Season 6 had several really good episodes. The one that was the parody of the John Carpenter movie, I found that particularly good and interesting. And I was hopeful, at the very least, that the show could have some sort of renaissance, where maybe it wouldn't go back to exactly how it was, because the show had clearly progressed a little bit beyond that, but it could put forth something new, interesting, unique that could at least parallel the quality of what it once attained. And boy, was there no shortage of support and hype and fandom for them to achieve it. The sky was the limit, you know? And I still believe that, even after the series fell on a little bit of hard times. I still believed that it had the potential to continue doing great things. I said this in the Rick and Morty main channel video, and I'll say it again. Stuff like The Simpsons and South Park didn't produce their best work until season 6, 7, 8, so I don't really think it was far-fetched to infer that Rick and Morty could possibly do the same. I mean, that's the liberty you get with an episodic series. Each episode is sort of a new blank slate, and you can just build up momentum again. But at the same time, after a while, it sort of just comes off as sounding like the same story over and over again. Oh, just give them time. They'll get better. Just give the writers some more opportunity to build chemistry. They'll figure it out. And don't get me wrong, there have been strong showings in individual episodes, but ever since the second season ended, the show has been lacking this sort of punch that it once did. It's difficult to put into words, but the series really did have this sort of confidence about it. Like, this is the product we're gonna make, now let's set off and execute. There was this sense of cohesion to season 1 and 2 of Rick and Morty that has since gone by the wayside. The more modern episodes definitely feel a lot more eclectic, a little bit more thematically and tonally disparate. Whereas those first couple seasons, every episode seemingly was hammering in the same themes, like this is what Rick and Morty is about, and we're showing it through the quality and cohesion of our work. Those first 20 episodes had a very consistent tone about them, where they would each deal with very different subject matter, but at the end of it all, you'd end up feeling sort of the same way, and that's important for a show. It's important for the viewer to anticipate how the show is going to make them feel at the end. And unfortunately, that was a seal of quality that they weren't really able to keep up anytime afterwards. You see them overhaul the entire writing staff and then start to take the show in a bit of a different creative direction. There are all of a sudden all these questions over whether the new showrunners and writers really intuitively understood what the show was about, or at least what those first 2 seasons set up thematically. You see this pretty significant change in the presentation of Rick as a character Whereas in the early seasons, he'd find himself in some extenuating situation and he'd use some sort of clever solution to get out of it. It was satisfying to watch Rick solve problems. But from season 3 and onward, he basically just turns into this brute force Rambo type figure where he can almost effortlessly overpower any situation that's in front of him. I really didn't appreciate that change in the character. I felt like it completely stonewalled the plot of many episodes, because when Rick is capable of getting out of any situation almost instantaneously, then how are you going to expect me to feel any sort of tension for what the characters are going through? So that was a pretty fundamental change in storytelling that I felt sunk the show a little bit, and probably for a lot of other people too. Rick was just somehow given this insane power boost to the point where it completely disrupted the plot structure. And for the main character of your show to basically be given these god powers and to be omniscient, I'm sorry, it just makes it less compelling. Characters need to be flawed, reasonably flawed, to make them relatable, and to make the plot scenarios they end up facing seem somewhat realistic. After a while, you just end up with these logical inconsistencies where you see Rick in some big problem and you think to yourself, why doesn't he just whip out another auto-win gadget like he did 2 episodes ago and the situation will be completely resolved? You start second guessing the internal logic of the show once a character has been given a little too much leeway to resolve the conflict of each episode. And moreover, I guess another consequence of Rick gaining such an absurdly high power level is that it seemed like after a while, rather than being a part of the plot, he was pretty much dictating the plot. And again, it's not as compelling for a character to be consistently shown to have so much influence over so many situations across so many episodes. He sort of stops feeling like a character in the show and more so just like an extension of the creators to act upon the show. It disrupts the immersion. It makes it so that you can't really take the stakes and conflict seriously, because sooner or later it's just going to be instantaneously resolved by some borderline magical device. And that just wasn't very satisfying to watch as a viewer. In my opinion, it was much more interesting to watch Rick actually have to struggle with problems and outsmart the situation rather than just brute force finding a magical weapon in his arsenal to instantly resolve things. So that was definitely a problem the show ran into. They got way too trigger happy with just letting Rick take over the entire plot, whether or not it made any logical sense. So in addition to Rick's character being made far less interesting, the other main problem with the later seasons of Rick and Morty was it just really didn't seem like it knew what kind of show it wanted to be. Like, is it episodic or is it serialized? How much do you want to lean into the story? Does the story even matter? Or is the show just trying to subvert the audience in that way again? Do they want to do wacky improv? Do they want to do dramatic character pieces? Do they want to just do ridiculous stories of like making a giant incest baby? I mean, I guess you could argue these were all individual elements that showed up in season 1 and 2 when the show was still trying to form its identity. But after a while, I think the expectation for a sitcom is that it has to form this level of consistency for what the audience is supposed to expect out of any given episode. And I just feel like the writers and the showrunners were too hesitant to just commit the show to be this one thing. But in many aspects, they wanted to have their cake and eat it too, and they just wanted to try to do everything and be everything. And it all sort of just watered down the overall experience. I feel like the show would have wound up in a much better place if they had just committed to saying, okay, we want to tell a dramatic story with these characters. Or if they just said, okay, forget about the story, we're just going to be a fully episodic comedy through and throughout. And each episode is going to be its new, distinct experience where you don't have to worry about shoehorning in some plot element to be paid off later. But no, across all this time, season 3, 4, 5, 6, they're still trying to do a little bit of story, a little bit of episodic. It creates this inconsistency, which is not what you want out of a sitcom. If you think of something like Seinfeld and King of the Hill, that's what Rick and Morty, in my opinion, should be. That's what it's billed as. You turn on any episode of King of the Hill, it's going to be roughly the same type of story with the characters doing the same type of things. And I get, that they want to be new and innovative and unique. They're imaginative, they're creative. That's something that draws a lot of people into the show. But at some point it comes across like trying to reinvent the wheel. These certain staples of television, they work. They're battle tested. They've been proven to work. The Simpsons, South Park, Family Guy, they know what they are. You can maybe do a one-off, two-parter episode occasionally that tells its own more grandiose, contained story. But you have to commit. You have to commit to what the show is going to be. And I just feel like even up until last year in season 6, they're still sort of just waffling around, trying to do a little bit of everything. Jack of all trades, master of none. But if you ask me, the number one problem preventing Rick and Morty from reaching its true potential was, ironically, nothing to do with the show itself, but rather everything that went on around the show. And I'm of course referring to the constant delays and gridlock related to the show's production. The season 2 finale of Rick and Morty aired in December 2015. 8 years have passed since then. And so far the production crew has only managed to put out 4 seasons of television. And this ain't like the old days where every season of a TV show was expected to have 20, 25 episodes in it. In 8 years, Rick and Morty were only able to produce 40 episodes, 4 seasons of 10 episodes. And to me, that is the true reason behind the show's downfall, or at least their perceived downfall. Coming out of season 2, they were white hot. I ain't hardly seen anything like it. A show like that doesn't come around often. And for whatever reason, the network, the showrunners, the creators, whoever, they were just completely unprepared to handle a show of that caliber. 40 episodes in 8 years. And a seemingly non-stop barrage of setbacks. Just setback after setback. I don't necessarily want to call it unlucky, because a lot of these problems were sure as hell the fault of the creators and the network. Starting as early as the production for season 3, when the show was white hot, ready to take the step into just immortality if they had simply capitalized on it in time. But no, all of a sudden Dan Harmon has a big creative setback, the writing team is overhauled, and it takes 2 years to come out. 2 years. And the results were underwhelming. And that right there was when you lost people. You lost a lot of people. The show was no longer trending upward after that point. You had lightning in a bottle and you just let it fizzle out. And maybe if the production delay could somehow be proven as an anomaly, you could let it slide. But no, it was far from an anomaly. It ended up becoming the norm. 2 years for each season of television. I struggle to think of another show in Rick and Morty's position that had that level of ineptitude with releasing the content they were supposed to release. And I know, awfully rich coming from me, Mr. hasn't released a main channel video in 3 months. But I don't have the resources and the expectations that Rick and Morty had placed upon it when it came stumbling out of the gates in that really disappointing stretch in 2017. And that was where you lost a bunch of people. And after that, it took 2 more years for the network to finally decide that it wanted to renew the show. And I don't know whether it was because of Adult Swim, Cartoon Network, Turner, Warner Bros. Whoever was in charge, they fumbled the bag. They fumbled big time. Oh, would you look at that? It's the most popular thing our network has ever produced by an enormous margin. I wonder if we should renew it. God knows why it took them 2 years to finally decide to order new episodes. But here you go, fans. Take another 2-year delay for another season to come out. And that led to season 4 not wrapping up until 2020. And oh, guess what? It's 2020. COVID. Everyone's shut down. Everything has to shut down. And now this is not anyone's fault, but it still just goes to show this show couldn't catch a break. It couldn't have anything go their way to actually get these episodes out on time. I've never known another show like it. I've never known a show. Obviously, COVID 2020, you can throw out as a big exception because people were literally not allowed to work during that time. But I've never seen any show that reached the caliber of Rick and Morty's popularity consistently fail to come out with programming on a yearly basis. This is just the bare minimum expectation for a TV show. And it's honestly surprising that Rick and Morty maintain the popularity they did for so long by having the fans wait 2-year intervals between seasons. Any other fan base would have given up long ago, but the Rick and Morty fans, as I mentioned in my video, they're a little bit nutty, and they're really, really loyal, or at least they were. Eventually, the reality started to set in that, okay, this is just how it's gonna be. 2 years in between seasons. 8 years in total to release 4 seasons, none of which ever managed to match the quality of what they put out before. And man, 8 years, it's a long time to ask out of anyone to retain their interest. I mean, all these problems we talk about with the show and how it's not as good as the original, it could have been ironed out. It could have been ironed out if the season actually stuck to releasing 1 season per 1 year. We could have been on episode 80 by now instead of episode 60. And who knows where the show would be or how it could have turned out if they actually stuck to a consistent output schedule and all these stupid production setbacks didn't completely kill what little momentum the show had. And what do you know, would you look at that, the second it looks like the show is finally getting back on track to somewhat, at least some semblance of a regular production schedule. The creator, co-creator of the show and voice of the 2 main characters arrested. It's done. Rick and Morty is finished. It's never, ever going to be back to what it once was, and if we're lucky, it's going to come back and return as a shell of what it once was. They're going to find some other guy who sounds a little bit like Justin Roiland, but not quite, and the show is just going to be a husk of what it once was. Many people would say that that's already the reality of the situation, but I was holding out hope. Once again, I put my faith in something, and I just get burned. The show's not going to recover from this. The party's over. It's just, I've given up. I've already moved on, you know? It's like when you're watching a sports game and your team goes down by an insurmountable margin. You just throw your hands up and say it's over. Turn it off. You know it's over. You know they're not coming back from it. And that's how it feels right now with Rick and Morty. It's done. You can turn off the channel. The outcome is no longer in doubt. I feel like that scene in Whiplash where Neiman just got T-boned and he hobbles over to the competition anyway and his hands are all bloody and he can barely even hold his drumsticks. And Fletcher comes over to him, puts his hand on his shoulder and says, "Neiman, you're done." And that's how I feel about Rick and Morty right now. So much promise, such great expectations, and at the end of the day, very little actually delivered. And plenty of people out there are happy to see it go. They're lining up to say good riddance, and I guess since the show reached such a mainstream level of popularity, I guess that's sort of the contrarian thing to do, but I'm not happy to see it go. I liked watching it, even up until the present day. I still like the show. I think it's a good show. Good shows are hard to come by nowadays, and now there's going to be one less. So I can't say I'm really celebrating that much. God, man. It looked like it was going to be the one. It looked like it was going to be the defining show of my generation. And maybe for what little it managed to accomplish, it did just that. It's rare nowadays that you find a show that you and all your friends watch. And Rick and Morty was one of those shows. Everyone liked it. Everyone wanted to see more of it. And it just ended up being yet another exercise in disappointment. Just like everything else on TV or in the movie theater. So, oh well. At least you still have the Downward Diary. And I'll try my best in the next year to not get arrested for felony charges.